Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guests today are Dave Vellante. He's the chief analyst for theCube and SiliconANGLE. And we've got John Furrier. He's the founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of SiliconANGLE and theCube. Gentlemen, good to have you both with us. And John, I want to ask you first, just for the elucidation of our audience, theCube, what is it? What does it do? And tell us a little bit about it.
Thanks so much for having us. Really appreciate it. theCube is our video program / network where we do go to events and in studio broadcast technology, trends, information, leaders around enterprise and emerging tech. So from cloud computing, from storage devices, infrastructure to AI and blockchain and crypto, all in between, all powered in the cloud. We cover all those trends. SiliconANGLE.com is our publication where our journalists are writing stories, and the video stories and the tech stories blend. We have podcasts, and we have a research team called, we keep on in the Cube Collective. That's the community of practitioners that are in our network, roughly about 17,000 experts in the Cube network that we've interviewed over the years, all part of one community.
All right, so a lot of years since electronic news was last published. I'm going to have to tune in and check it out myself. Excellent.
Please do.
All right. So you've looked at government, you've looked at the market here, and you know something about what's going on here. I want to talk about modernization, and agencies are really in the thick of this. Congress talks about it. Almost every agency talks about it. There's money for it all over the place if you can find and kind of nail it down. What do you think that government can best do to accelerate its modernization in such a way that it can get it successful and make it stick?
I mean, I would say the first thing that you should do is look at your portfolio, specifically your application portfolio, and rationalize it. One of the big problems that most IT organizations have, whether it's commercial or government, is they never get rid of stuff. And that creates a lot of technical debt. It creates a lot of friction in the environment. So I think you want to really start by identifying those applications that are driving value to the organization. And there's a lot of ways to measure that. And one of the easiest is who's using it. Yeah. And, if it disappeared tomorrow, how bad would that be? And it's even subjectively, now you can quantify that, but I would start with an application rationalization exercise and understand which applications you can do without and get rid of those as fast as possible. And then I think there are others that you just have to let die through attrition. And then there are others you want to double down and invest in. So I think, starting there and then understand how, for example, a cloud operating model, I think operating model is much more important than, which features, but how you can take advantage of that operating model, understanding DevOps, understanding infrastructure as code, and understanding how to build in from the beginning security and governance. And that's going to make your organization a lot more agile and deliver a lot more value to your constituents.
Yeah, I would also add to that great insight and call out there, but the key to me is the bold leadership that's needed to identify the big bets that need to be made. As technology shifts, you've got to balance existing legacy technology and then refactor for a future platform. This is what you see in all the more exciting bids, from the JEDI contract to all kinds of back office activities you've seen. Public sector changing with private public coming together. It takes bold leadership to identify those use cases. And once you do, you need a team of people that understand the difference between some of the nuances of technology. Not everything can be AI magic. There's a lot of blocking and tackling that goes on and setting up the infrastructure and these software defined, real-time environments.
Well, you do find sometimes in agencies multiple versions, not even multiple versions, matching applications that do the same thing in finance, in logistics, some of the bread and butter types of applications that support the mission. And that's probably a ripe area for rationalization. So it would seem a good criteria, a set of criteria would be, can it be refactored for the cloud? Is there a way to modernize it with DevSecOps? Those kinds of criteria might help you decide what to rationalize and shut off. Fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you can really consolidate some of these redundant capabilities. And I think you got to look at that. In fact, that's this day and age with all the economic headwinds. I think a lot of organizations are looking at how they can consolidate those redundant capabilities and how they can potentially standardize on a single vendor that can do multiple things. And again, I come back to you've got to have strong governance. You've got to have a developer environment that can potentially work across multiple clouds. I know, we might get into some of that in just in terms of risk management, but having open APIs that can allow for better integration across an ecosystem and open entries into and exits from a particular platform, I think are crucial, and just in terms of sort of, future-proofing, if you will, your platforms.
And I think also the game is changing fast. So with AI, the big hype, you're seeing tools that are emerging that weren't around before that could help you, one, write code and or fill these gaps in. The old Wayne Gretzky expression, skate to where the puck is going to be, is something that comes up a lot, because you can now eliminate these redundancies, which, by the way, cause data silos, which, in the spirit of, AI, if you don't have the right data architecture, AI doesn't work, or machine learning doesn't work. So you're seeing kind of new things emerge that weren't around 6 years ago, or even 6 months ago, that gets everyone's attention, saying there's now viable ways and financially viable ways to do it. If you have the team and the leadership to do it, there are opportunities to kind of clean house, if you will, on some of the old technologies, whether it's using containers and Kubernetes and cloud native, or bare metal with virtual machines. So there's a lot going on around some of this data infrastructure that will enable new applications to be written really, really fast.
Yeah, you've kind of answered my next question. After you do your application rationalization, you've got to deal with data, because a lot of those applications had data associated with them that you might still want, even if you don't want the logic that is using that data, correct?
Yeah, and I think this is a really hard problem, and there's no real simple answer. And now, especially with the AI that was heard around the world with ChatGPT, you really got to think about, how do you want to break down silos? Everybody talks about silos. Silos are bad, but having said that, there's not going to be one data platform to rule them all. I mean, different types of data platforms are better. The old British phrase, horses for courses, better for certain things. And you don't want to try to stretch your data platform too thin. You want to architect a data strategy where your data platforms, you think about them as accessible nodes on a mesh, versus thinking about shoving everything into a giant single data platform that rules it all. Having said that, increasingly these data platforms are getting more and more functional. Some that are really focused on transactional data, or do at least accommodating analytics, and then vice versa. So you really got to pick your spots. And I think you have to understand, is the objective to really be efficient, or is it to be fast? I mean, if you're in the field in a defense or a military application, you want to be as agile as possible. If you're doing more back office functions, well, maybe you can be a little less agile and be more cost efficient. And so there really isn't one true answer there, but you definitely want to focus on breaking down those silos. And again, it comes back to governance and security. You got to design that in from the start, or you're never going to break down.
You design security and compliance in from day one. However, data now is the operational linchpin of all technology operations. It's no longer a department. It's ingrained in all aspects of public sector, from national security down to education. Data is the competitive advantage for this country, whether it's for liberty and or for national security. You're seeing it. If it's not available, you can't access data. There is no benefits of that operationalized. So the IT used to run and operationalize our society. And now it's data. That's the key to everything. And if it's not done properly, then things just won't work.
And it's easy to think of data in the operational or tactical sense, but do you feel agencies need a good data strategy that would then oversee and kind of direct the strategies they take technically? And so if that's the case, what are the cornerstones? What's the foundational elements of a solid data strategy that you can move to the cloud and do all that good DevSecOps stuff?
Well, we know data silos don't really work from an addressability standpoint. They work in some areas, but I think the data conversation is a lot like the cloud conversation when the pandemic hit. Everyone can relate to what happened when the pandemic crippled our society. The people who were leaning into the cloud got massive benefits. You saw things like Amazon's call center was very successful. It really helped agencies get back up in line in a very agile way, and it was a forcing function. And so the folks that weren't in the cloud got hamstrung. They were either dismantled completely or fell behind. AI right now, if you don't have a good data strategy at all, then you're going to be behind. So I think, one, get a data strategy, understand what that means, and then understand the keys to it. For example, words like high availability and highly available mean something different in terms of real time versus not real time. So it's very technical, but it's also the data infrastructure will run the operations, that is the key. So one, get a data strategy. A good one, I guess beauty's in the eye of the beholder. It depends on what the situation is, which agency it is, what their applications are. That's where the exciting stuff is emerging, and it's just getting started.
And I think it comes back to value, right? There's a power law of data. Certain data is a very high value, and it, may be less of it. And then there's a lot of data, that may not be as valuable, but you still want to have it on hand for whatever, for analytics or historical reference. And so it comes back to understanding what the mission is of the agency, how to best serve your constituencies, where they're going to get the most value out of that, what kind of criteria in terms of governance and data protection and security are necessary. Because if you just take a one size fits all, you're going to end up spending too much in some cases and not enough in others. So you got to really try to take a somewhat more granular look at your organization from a data strategy standpoint.
And I would say also from an application standpoint, Tim, is that if you look at the application, I'll take one, I'll just random one, the tactile edge for military warfighters. I think close to 40% of deaths were friendly fire, and that's because they didn't have good surveillance around the territories around the corner. So they want to have real-time information. So having data in a centralized data center that goes all the way out the theater back is not very fast. So they want to put data in the edge, tactical edge, as they call it. That's real time. That takes a technology, that takes an architecture, and that's the difference between old school and new school, is having these new kinds of architectures. There's no real playbook that's for everybody. It's the applications will determine. I think the developers are going to be involved in that. So I think that's a really important point, that the agencies each understand their applications and then make the data infrastructure be programmable, or as we say, data as code.
Right. And edge comes up a lot in these discussions because it's not just a function of your data centers as an agency and the cloud service providers you use, but there's this edge element. And we're seeing all the emergence of all sorts of hardware that mimics cloud architectures, but it's actually an edge deployed cube or something that's, easy to transport in the case of the military, this kind of thing. So then once you have that data strategy, then you need some technical ways of arraying your data, let's say, across these different platforms. And what does that look like? What are you seeing in government? Are they getting it?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because the sort of standard conventional thinking is that government agencies move more slowly than commercial businesses. And while I would say in general that might be true, I think there are many cases where government can lead, specifically to your point, Tom, the military. I mean, I think there are some things that are mission critical. We're talking about lives here, where things at the edge are changing so quickly. I mean, take, for instance, AI inferencing at the edge, where you don't necessarily have internet connectivity, where you don't have necessarily, a lot of bandwidth, or you need processing power that has to be very low power because you don't have necessarily great power sources. So I think there's a huge opportunity and we're going to see it, for disruption at the edge. We're definitely seeing it in things like smart factories. We're seeing it in automotive. Things like Tesla is a great case of AI inferencing at the edge. I think Apple is doing some amazing things there in semiconductors. We've seen an explosion of NVIDIA, and obviously, government agencies have, I think, a strong incentive and pipeline to partner with critical component suppliers and technology suppliers like semiconductor manufacturers to secure access, because it's a matter of national security. So I actually think this is an example where public sector can lead, specifically military.
It's also a trick question, because the question, are they ready? I mean, are they ready for the technology, or are they ready as teams to actually execute? So I would say that, in my opinion, based upon in talking to the folks in the agencies, is that they're really not ready yet. Their toes are in the water. As a personnel, I think the public-private relationships are huge right now. That's a really key trend that's accelerating it. I think each agency is definitely ready to be impacted by the technology and data, for sure. The question is, how will they deploy it? And I think a lot of factors come back to pre-existing conditions of their vendor environment and their databases and the legacy infrastructure and contracts. So I think operationally, organizationally, I don't think they're truly ready yet, but the trends are looking that they're getting there faster. There's been implementation in the cloud, so that's the first step. To be fully viable, maybe some streamlining of those contracts. Data is hugely important for these environments. So I think there's still going to be a little bit of a friction there, in my opinion.
And I think that one of the thing I'd add is you really want to understand how your cloud partner and the associated, data partners that you might be working with and technology partners, how they're approaching the edge. You don't want to create yet another silo at the edge. You want to have that identical operating experience, developer experience, both in the cloud, on premises and sort of a hybrid, but also out to the edge. You want that identical experience wherever possible.
And I think also, Tim, the other point I would say is that agencies tend to have a contract mindset when selecting winners of bids. So that kind of forces a siloed mentality. And in the cloud technology is highly scalable, horizontally scalable, vertically integrated. So the combination of availability of data and being specialized is super new architecture trend that's emerging.
Right. So in some ways you want to abstract the data for whatever platform it's available on. And that gets to the question of this idea of agility. And that seems to be something a lot of agencies are pursuing, whether it's mission agility or tactical agility. And that gets to maybe talk about the relationship between your data architecture, and you've got this new data strategy and everything's rendered, all your APIs as code, so it's all portable. But then there's the DevSecOps on the application side to tie it all together. Maybe comment on that.
Well, security built in from day one is critical, and compliance and security have to be there in day one. Guardrails are going to be important. Security ops is a key part of the new operations. You're seeing that in cloud native. And developers, as they write code, or what they call shifting left, is what they're doing in the application, where they can actually fix policy-based security things in line when they're coding, not have to file a ticket, bring it back. So I think the scalability and the efficiency of developer productivity becomes really important when you have the right security architecture. This has really become the hottest thing. And secondly is the supply chain security problem. So as you have supply chain challenges, having this DevSecOps with security guardrails gives the developer the ability to be more productive and at the same time more secure for the organization.
I think the other thing too is managed services. I mean, managed services have exploded and the adoption is off the charts because it's just so much more simple. Yes, you may have to spend a little bit more, or maybe not in a lot of cases because of competition, but having the ability to have a managed service versus doing it all yourself. It's one thing, the cloud, okay, great. I don't have to, go to the loading dock and install the equipment and plug in a bunch of cables, but also having that managed service where all the mundane work is taken care of, whether it's patching or database upgrades or, the like. That has been a game changer and something that really was impossible at scale before the cloud.
And let's talk about security in the cloud, because besides all of these technical innovations that agencies need to get to, the edge computing, the data strategy, the more agile development techniques, and so on, is underlying it all is security. And cloud providers have security for the cloud. What's the best strategy for ensuring that your workloads and your data are secure in the cloud, working with cloud services? I mean, we call them cloud services providers, and they have catalogs of thousands of items in those service catalogs that agencies can use. And so how does that all work in the best sense right now at this point in history?
Well, in public sector, they have the FedRAMP programs like that. They're critical. They have to be certified in there. That's default security on by default. And FedRAMP is a great service that Amazon, for instance, has been great at, and they're phenomenal at it. That's the key to compliance certification. And cloud security, it has better security than on-premise. It's been proven. It used to be kind of like that people would say, oh, cloud's not secure, but not anymore. Cloud has the best security. They have the tools, they have the certification. And I think that's when you're seeing the success of the marketplace, these marketplaces, as well as integrating higher level services. So if you're going to add more services more in an agile way, you want to have certification and built in from day one, secure by default.
I'd say a couple of things on that. I mean, security in the cloud is better. I mean, there's no question about it. It's more standardized. It's homogeneous. It's, the physical security is stronger. I think there's very little debate about that anymore, but it brings in that shared responsibility model that is different, right? The cloud vendor is going to take care of some things, going to be really clear as to what is the responsibility of the customer and how that interacts with other partners in the ecosystem. software companies, for example, plugging into that model to create a safer environment. John mentioned FedRAMP. There's StateRAMP, which is kind of a clone of FedRAMP for the states. It is sometimes a bottleneck because you got to get approved. You got to go through the process. I know there are alternatives like the cloud control matrix that could accelerate adoption. But at the end of the day, the cloud and its security model, to the extent that you can get that right, it's the first line of defense. Developers, we talked about programmable infrastructure. That's kind of the next line of defense. And then, you've got the CISO, and he or she has audit to lean on as well. So you've got to think about it a little bit differently. There's some new layers that are occurring. And then if you go across clouds, that adds even more complexity. Mm-hmm. But there's no question that the cloud operating model is going to make folks more secure if they get it right.
All right, let's add this all up then. We've got a new way of approaching applications. We've got a new way of approaching data, and we've got a new way of architecting all of this so that the best computing resource for the given moment is the one that's actually deployed. And as you mentioned earlier, the data is architected to look the same regardless of whether it is, so you don't have silos anymore. What should be the effective goals of all of this effort? I mean, what can agencies, by going through this exercise and getting to this nirvana of modernization, what is it they should be accomplishing as agencies, do you think?
I mean, it sounds like obvious, but you got to start with the mission of the agency, right? Is it to, serve constituents better and faster and more efficiently? Is it to protect American lives? Is it to accelerate innovation in space? Whatever that mission of the agency is, you've got to align with that from a technology strategy standpoint. And I think change management is critical. When we're moving from on-prem to the cloud, whether it's lift and shift, or you're going to do a modernization exercise or whatever it is, you absolutely have to get change management right, because technology is going to come and go. And so you have to be able to accommodate new technology. If you get stuck going through, John, you like to talk about a one-way door with too much technical debt, you're going to be in trouble, and you're going to have to make some hard decisions down the road. So I think aligning with that mission, really truly understanding that mission and how the cloud, and maybe not necessarily always the cloud, but how specifically the cloud is going to support that mission is crucial.
I would say the big thing for these agencies is to minimize their operational risk while expanding the innovation strategy. That is mission critical data, application data, all data that they would need for developers who will now become the new drivers of the value, which is applications and workloads. And those workloads will be diverse, and those workloads will run on infrastructure, data infrastructure and compute infrastructure with higher level cloud services like containers and Kubernetes and cloud native. These new workloads are going to be redefined and created in much faster way than ever before. So there's big application tsunami coming to the agencies. That's an opportunity. So the operational credibility and stability is super important. And to minimize that risk is to have some standards and a quality team, and then enable the developers to create that value. That to us is the key to success. And each agency can thrive and continue to innovate if they have that in place.
And I would add just a partner ecosystem allows you to both manage that risk and continue to innovate with best of breed.
And the other issue that agencies have been wrestling with for so many years is, and you alluded to it earlier, is they want to get out of that capital expenditure model, CapEx, and move to OpEx, because sometimes when you want to do something that was a 3-year cycle to be able to get it into the budget, then to acquire the hardware, then to get the hardware delivered, and yada, yada. And it was a very old problem that was people were getting tired of. And so now we have cloud, and you can do this, as you say, without any of that effort. But then there's always the question of what's it going to cost? This cloud adoption is not free. Cloud services are not free. Cloud data extraction is where a lot of the cost lies. And so the more you have data in the cloud, the more you have to extract it from the cloud. So maybe just discuss before we close some of the financial considerations and justifications too. It may cost more to be that agile and that fast and that ability, that having that ability to respond to the mission, but it won't be cheaper. What's the old saying?
There's a lot of people
better, faster, cheaper, right?
Yeah, Tom, there's a lot of motivated people to keep the contracts the way they are that don't add a lot of value in the new model. And those companies are going to hold on as hard as they can to those contracts. And you can extract away their technology by using containers. So you don't have to kill the old to bring in the new in terms of a tech standpoint. So that's one. And the other one is just look at the teams that have bold vision. I think that's going to be the motivating factor. Can you get to the new technology faster? And having that cost structure. Now, cloud is elastic, dial up variable, but you also dial it down. So you can be just as agile up and down in terms of pivoting your resource base, but on premise as well with cloud operations. It's not just public cloud by itself. You can have infrastructure that's on premises and edge, which is the distributed computing environment. This is where it's going right now. And that's the cloud native operating model. And again, minimizing operating risk is the key, and getting to cloud operations, whether it's in the public cloud or on premise or edge, is critical. And that data has to be consistent and available across those three environments.
And I think, looking at the government's own language, the parlance is instructive. In 2010, it was cloud first was the mandate. In 2018, it was cloud smart, really talking about, okay, how do we do this in a balanced way? I think the other thing is open, leveraging open source is critical for innovation. But I would say this, that there are certain workloads that are working just fine, where migrating them to the cloud, maybe doesn't make sense. If it's working, maybe could be very well be mission critical. If you've got to freeze that application for 9, 12 months, if you've got to rewrite a bunch of code, if you have to go down a parallel path and try to refuel the engine while you're in midair, or worse, change it out, that could be not the best move. So you want to pick those applications where you can get the most leverage, and those are the ones that you're going to move into the cloud. You know what? And even if they are a little bit more expensive, if you can get the benefit of that flexibility, the agility, and allow the organization and the personnel in the organization to focus on more strategic areas, that, to me, that's worth it. And I think that's the decision that agencies really have to make and do their homework on that business case.
And in managing your cloud loads for optimal cost and optimal performance, that's a really good kind of basic bread and butter application of artificial intelligence, so that hey, I can shut down this instance or these 5 instances from 11 o'clock at night Eastern Standard to 6 a.m. or something like that. And if you fine tune all of these and AI can really speed that up for you, that analysis, then you're probably going to be ahead of the game.
Yeah, AI ops, I think, can help a lot with, FinOps really took off when the economic headwinds hit. And it was, not total rocket science, but it wasn't trivial either. I think AI can do a lot there to really help drive automation. And listen, the best AI right now is in the cloud, and it's likely to be that way for quite some time.
And the AI success stories are starting to come out where you start seeing the value of AI. It's not just the large language models that are proprietary or public. It's the data of the customer, or the person has proprietary workflows and proprietary data that they own that intersects with AI. So data feeds the AI. AI is driven by data. So if you have bad data strategy, you'll probably have a bad AI strategy output.
All right. Any final thoughts before we close out on modernization, getting to the cloud, having a great data strategy? Dave?
Well, I do think that we are entering a new era. I mean, we've seen a lot of waves, and this new AI first wave we think is real. And I think every organization, whether it's commercial or public sector, really has to look at where they can apply AI, as John said, just not large language models, but AI, internally in their business, externally for their constituents, to drive innovation, to cut costs. Those that don't do that are going to be left behind. This is real, and it's going to be a decade plus wave that you want to be on. You don't want to miss this wave.
All right,
My feeling,
final words.
My feeling is private-public partnerships critical. Creating an application environment where they can serve their constituents and their customers has to be in place. That's going to come from operational infrastructure. And at the end of the day, if they don't have that in place, that value won't come. So, this is a whole wave. I'm old enough to remember the old mainframes when the PCs came out. Government, PCs are unsecure. Well, then everyone has a PC now, a smartphone. With AI, this is one of those waves where it will change the landscape and what the agencies look like to themselves and to their customers. So I think data will play a big part of it, and that's going to be a big thing to watch.
All right. John Furrier is founder, co-CEO, and editor-in-chief of SiliconANGLE and theCUBE. Dave Vellante is the chief analyst for SiliconANGLE and theCUBE. Gentlemen, thank you both very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
I'm Tom Temin. You're listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search MongoDB and AWS.